A poor rancher saved a wounded native child. What followed shocked the whole town. He was just a poor rancher, living a lonely life in the unforgiving Wild West, until a desperate cry in the wilderness forced him to make a choice that would shock the entire town. What he found was not just a wounded child, but a secret that could destroy lives, ignite hatred, and challenge everything he believed about humanity. And what happens next will leave you questioning who the real heroes are. The sun hung low in the sky, a blazing orb that set the horizon aflame with hues of orange and red, casting long shadows over the arid plains of the Wild West. Dust swirled in the hot wind, dancing like lost spirits across the barren landscape. A lone figure rode through the desolation, his silhouette stark against the fiery backdrop. Caleb Hawthorne, a poor rancher with weathered hands and a heart hardened by loss, pressed on toward the distant hills, unaware that fate was about to intervene in a way he could never have imagined. Just as he crested a rise, a sharp cry pierced the air, slicing through the stillness like a knife. It was a sound of desperation, raw and haunting. Caleb's horse, a sturdy chestnut named Rusty, snorted and halted, sensing the tension in the air. Caleb squinted into the distance, and there, half hidden by the underbrush, he spotted the source of the commotion. A small figure lay crumpled on the ground, a native child, his skin glistening with sweat under the sun's relentless gaze. With a leap, Caleb dismounted and rushed toward the boy, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. The child was no older than 6, his tiny frame trembling in pain. Blood oozed from a wound on his leg, a jagged cut that glistened ominously in the fading light. The rancher's instincts kicked in, and he dropped to his knees beside the boy, his calloused hands trembling as he brushed the dirt away. "Hold on, little fella," Caleb murmured, his voice a gentle balm against the boy's ragged breaths. The child looked up, eyes wide with fear, but something in Caleb's steadfast gaze soothed the storm of terror within him. Caleb had lost much in his 32 years, a wife to fever, a son to the cruel hands of fate, and now he lived a solitary life, tending his meager ranch, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the plains. Yet, beneath the weight of his sorrow, a flicker of compassion remained, a spark that had not been extinguished by life's hardships. He knew the pain of being alone, and in that moment, he could not turn away from a child in need. As he tore a strip from his own shirt to bind the wound, the boy's eyes flickered with a mix of gratitude and apprehension. Caleb worked swiftly, his movements calm and confident, as he wrapped the makeshift bandage around the child's leg. "You're gonna be all right," he whispered, even as he felt the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. Once the wound was dressed, Caleb lifted the boy gently into his arms, cradling him against his chest as he made his way back to Rusty. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in deeper shades of crimson, and the shadows of the past loomed large in Caleb's mind. He had never considered himself a hero, just a man trying to survive. Yet here he was, carrying this child, this innocent soul, who had fallen victim to a world fraught with violence and misunderstanding. The ride back to his ranch was quiet, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of Rusty's hooves against the earth, and the boy's faint whimpers. Caleb felt a swell of protectiveness wash over him, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He could see the boy's face, pale and drawn, and he vowed to do everything in his power to save him. As they approached the ranch, the familiar sight of the weathered wooden fence and the modest homestead brought a sense of solace. Yet, even as Caleb dismounted and carried the boy inside, a heavy foreboding settled in his gut. He was aware of the tensions that simmered between the white settlers and the native tribes, the distrust and animosity that often erupted into violence. What would the townsfolk think of his actions? Would they see him as a savior or a traitor? Inside the small cabin, the fading light illuminated the rough-hewn furniture and the remnants of a life once filled with laughter. Caleb laid the boy on his bed, the only place he had left to offer comfort. He hurried to fetch water, a basin, and some herbs from his meager supply. As he worked, he thought of the stories he had heard, tales of retribution and bloodshed, of lives lost and families torn apart. He didn't want to believe that the child he had saved would be viewed as an enemy. Hours passed, and the boy drifted in and out of consciousness, each moment an agonizing reminder of the battle he fought within. Caleb sat beside him, his heart aching for the pain the child endured. He felt a connection to the boy, a silent understanding forged in shared suffering. As night cloaked the land, the stars emerged, twinkling like distant dreams, and Caleb whispered soft reassurances, hoping to ease the boy's fears. But as the moon rose high, casting a silver glow across the room, Caleb heard the sound that sent a shiver down his spine, the unmistakable thud of hooves approaching his ranch. Fear gripped him, and his mind raced. Were they coming for the child? Would the townsfolk seek vengeance for his act of compassion? He peered through the window, the shadows of riders moving ominously across the open ground. In that moment, Caleb understood the gravity of his choice. He had crossed a line, stepping into a world where kindness could be met with hostility. The rancher felt a surge of resolve. He would not turn his back on the boy now. He had chosen to save a life, and he would face whatever consequences awaited him. As the riders drew nearer, he steeled himself for the confrontation, knowing that the battle between compassion and cruelty was about to unfold before him. Unbeknownst to him, the choice he had made would ripple through the small town, shaking its foundations and challenging the very notion of what it meant to be human in a world so often defined by fear and hatred. In his heart, Caleb carried the weight of his decision, a flicker of hope igniting against the darkness that threatened to consume them both. He could only hope that, in the end, the light of his compassion would shine through the chaos that was about to erupt. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Caleb's heart thudded like a war drum in his chest as he stood at the window, peering into the darkness that enveloped his ranch. The flickering light from the oil lamp cast long shadows across the wooden floor, dancing like specters of doubt and fear. Outside, the night was thick with tension. The distant sound of hooves echoed like a grim herald, sending chills down his spine. The boy, nestled on a makeshift bed of old blankets in the corner, stirred restlessly, sensing the unease that filled the room. Caleb turned his gaze toward him, his heart softening at the sight of the child's small frame, fragile yet resilient. The boy's dark eyes fluttered open, brimming with confusion and a glimmer of trust that tugged at Caleb's heart. The wound on his shoulder had been staunch, but the boy's spirit was still raw, like a freshly split log, vulnerable yet full of potential. It's all right, Caleb whispered, kneeling beside him. He brushed a lock of hair from the boy's forehead, a gesture that felt both foreign and intimate. You're safe here. The child blinked up at him, the haze of pain mingling with the vulnerability of a wild creature caught in a snare. Caleb felt a swell of protectiveness rise within him, fierce as the storm clouds that gathered in the distance. The boy's life was now intertwined with his own, a bond forged in the crucible of fear and compassion. Yet, the sound of the riders drew closer, breaking the fragile peace. Caleb's thoughts raced. Would they come seeking vengeance? Would they see the boy as a trophy or a threat? The town, with its dusty streets and wary glances, felt like a distant land, a place where his past losses haunted him, and where the specter of prejudice loomed large. He rose to his feet, pacing the wooden floorboards that creaked beneath him, each sound echoing like a heartbeat of impending doom. The moonlight threaded through the window, illuminating the sparse furnishings of his home, a rough-hewn table, a single chair, and the remnants of a life once filled with laughter and warmth. Now, the emptiness felt as vast as the arid plains that stretched beyond his homestead. Glancing back at the boy, Caleb decided he would not let fear dictate his actions. He took a deep breath, letting the stale air fill his lungs, and made his way to the door. The weight of his decision pressed heavily upon him, but he could not abandon the child, not after everything they had endured together in such a short span. Stay here, Caleb instructed softly, placing a finger to his lips. I'll be right back. The boy nodded, his eyes wide, and Caleb could sense the silent plea for assurance in that simple gesture. He opened the door, the hinges creaking like the groans of the weary earth, and stepped into the cool night air. The world outside was painted in shades of gray, the moon casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As he stood on the porch, Caleb strained to hear the approaching riders, their presence a dark cloud looming on the horizon. He could see the silhouettes of horses against the moonlit sky, moving steadily toward his ranch. The sight sent a shiver down his spine, and he gripped the doorframe, his knuckles turning white. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. Why did I have to do this? The riders were nearing, their laughter carrying on the wind, harsh and mocking. Caleb clenched his jaw, his mind racing with possibilities. He thought of the townsfolk, how they had always looked at him with pity and disdain after the deaths of his wife and son? Would they see him as a traitor for harboring a native child, or would they come to understand the depths of his compassion? He took a step back inside, his heart pounding like a drum. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear," he instructed the boy again, who nodded with wide-eyed fear. Caleb felt a pang of guilt twist in his gut, knowing he had thrust the child into a world filled with hostility. He positioned himself by the window, his hands resting on the cool wood, bracing himself for the confrontation. The laughter grew louder, more boisterous, and he could hear the clinking of spurs and the snorts of the horses. The riders were close now, their shadows dancing in the moonlight, a menacing procession that threatened to unravel the fragile peace he had built. And then they stopped. Caleb's breath hitched as he caught sight of their faces, familiar outlines that belonged to the town's most unruly men. They were a band of troublemakers, known for their reckless ways and disdain for the native tribes. Caleb had seen them around town, their eyes alight with mischief and malice, always searching for a fight or an excuse to stir trouble. "What do you think they want?" he whispered to the boy, who shivered beside him, his small body trembling in fear. The child shrugged, his eyes glued to the gathering outside. Caleb's heart sank. He braced himself for the worst, knowing that the decision he had made could very well lead to violence. Suddenly, the lead rider, a burly man named Jake, dismounted, his boots thudding heavily against the ground. His face was twisted into a sneer that sent a chill down Caleb's spine. "What's going on in there, Hawthorne?" he called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You got a little secret, do ya?" Caleb clenched his fists at his side, anger flaring within him. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with, Jake," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He could feel the boy's eyes on him, a silent plea for protection. "Come now, don't be coy," Jake taunted, stepping closer to the door, flanked by his companions. "We've heard rumors about you tacking in strays. Is it true you've got a little Indian boy hidden in there?" Caleb swallowed hard, his throat dry as the summer dust that coated the plains. "He's just a child," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "He's hurt and needs help." Jake's laughter rang out, harsh and mocking, echoing in the stillness of the night. "A hurt Indian? What are you trying to do, Hawthorne? Make a pet out of him? You know folks around here won't take kindly to that." Caleb stood tall, summoning every ounce of courage within him. "I don't care what they think," he shot back, his voice firm. "He's not a trophy or a burden. He's a boy, just like mine were. He deserves a chance." The air crackled with tension, the riders exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Caleb felt the weight of their scrutiny, the judgment that hung heavy like the heat of the sun on a summer's day. But within him, a fire ignited of fierce determination to protect the innocent, to stand against the tides of hatred that threatened to engulf them both. Jake stepped closer, his expression darkening. "You're playing a dangerous game, Hawthorne. You think folks will just let this slide? You think they care about some half-breed boy?" Caleb's heart raced. "He's not half anything. He's whole, and he deserves to be treated like it." The words hung in the air, a thin line drawn in the sand. Caleb could feel the boy's presence behind him, a quiet strength that bolstered his resolve. He would not back down. "Not now. Let us in," Caleb Jake demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "You know what happens when folks like you get too friendly with those savages." Caleb's mind raced with the implications of what that meant. The townsfolk had always been quick to judge, their minds clouded by fear and bigotry. He could picture their faces: disgust, anger, betrayal should they discover what he had done. But looking back at the boy, he felt a surge of purpose. He couldn't let fear decide his fate. "Get off my property, Jake," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "I won't let you harm him. He's under my protection now." A tense silence fell, broken only by the distant rustle of wind through the grass. Jake's eyes narrowed as he weighed Caleb's defiance. The laughter of the other riders faded, replaced by an uneasy anticipation. Caleb could sense the shift in the air, the potential for violence simmering just beneath the surface. "Very well," Caleb Jake said finally, a dark smile creeping across his face. "But know this, you'll be the one who pays the price for this foolishness. We'll be watching." With that, Jake turned and mounted his horse, the other riders following suit. They rode off into the night, their laughter echoing like a haunting melody, leaving behind a heavy silence that pressed down on Caleb's shoulders. He exhaled sharply, his heart racing as he returned inside, closing the door behind him with a sense of finality. The boy looked up at him, a mixture of fear and confusion, clouding his young features. "Are we safe?" he whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. Caleb knelt beside him, his heart aching with the weight of the child's innocence. "For now," he replied, brushing a hand across the boy's cheek, feeling the warmth of life beneath his fingertips. "But we have to be careful. I won't let anyone take you away." In that moment, they shared a connection deeper than words, an understanding forged in the fires of adversity. They were bound by their scars, by the shared burden of loss and survival. Caleb knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he felt the flicker of hope ignite within him. As the moon hung high in the sky, casting its silver light upon the land, Caleb Hawthorne and the wounded native child stood together, ready to face whatever storm awaited them. They would fight for their right to exist in a world that sought to tear them apart, united by the strength of compassion and the promise of a better tomorrow. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. The simmering sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the dusty homestead. Caleb Hawthorne stood at the threshold of his modest ranch, his heart a tumult of dread and determination. The harsh wind whipped around him, carrying with it the muffled sounds of the town beyond, a place where whispers and glares mingled like the swirling dust that often suffocated the air. He turned back, glancing at the small figure nestled on the worn cot inside, the boy's brow furrowed in a fragile sleep, the bandages Caleb had hastily wrapped still stark against his dark skin. The confrontation with Jake and his gang had left Caleb shaken, but he knew that fear could not govern his actions. The boy needed care, not condemnation. A flicker of resolve ignited within him, pushing aside the echoes of Jake's taunts. Caleb stepped inside, the creaking door a soft protest against the stillness of the room. The boy stirred, his eyes fluttering open, revealing pools of deep brown that seemed to capture the very essence of the earth itself. "Hey there, little one," Caleb whispered, kneeling beside the cot. "How are you feeling?" The child blinked, taking a moment to recognize the kindness in Caleb's gaze. "Thirsty?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. Caleb nodded, rushing to the wooden bucket in the corner, filled with cool water from the well. He poured a small cup, careful not to spill, and brought it to the boy's lips. The child drank eagerly, and for a fleeting moment, Caleb felt the weight of the world lift. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice soothing. "You'll be all right." As the boy finished drinking, he looked up at Caleb, a question flickering behind those innocent eyes. "Why you help me?" he asked, his words hesitant, as if he feared the answer. Caleb paused, considering the boy's vulnerability. "Because everyone deserves help," he replied, his voice steady, though a lump formed in his throat. "You're just a child. No one should suffer alone." A small smile crept across the boy's face, illuminating his features, though it quickly faded to uncertainty. Caleb recognized the flicker of fear that crept back into the boy's expression, a reflection of the world outside these four walls. The town, with its narrow-mindedness and prejudice, loomed like a storm cloud, ready to unleash its fury upon them both. Caleb's mind drifted to the townsfolk, their faces twisted by disdain, their hearts hardened by a history marred with conflict. He could almost hear their murmurs, the rustling of skirts, and the scrape of boots against the saloon floors, all punctuated by the sharp laughter of those who believed they were above compassion. "Do you have a name?" Caleb asked gently, hoping to distract the boy from the shadows of doubt creeping into his mind. "Eli," he replied, his voice small but firm, as if claiming his identity against the tide of adversity. "Eli," Caleb repeated, savoring the sound. "It's a good name." Strong, he felt a swell of pride as he spoke it, as if welcoming a new member to his fractured family. A sudden clamor erupted outside, a cacophony of hooves and shouts that sent a chill down Caleb's spine. He moved to the window, peering out through the cracked glass, his heart pounding as he recognized the familiar figures of Jake and his men, riding hard toward the ranch. Dust billowed around them, swirling like the tempest of emotions in Caleb's heart. "Stay here," he instructed Eli, a commanding tone slipping into his voice, despite the alarm that gripped him. "Lock the door behind me." Eli's gaze darted toward the window, fear evident in his wide eyes. "They come for me," he whispered, the tremor in his voice pulling at Caleb's heart. "No," Caleb replied, his conviction firm. "They come for me. Just stay hidden." Eli, he turned to face the door, steeling himself against the growing dread. As he stepped outside, The sun bore down with an intensity that matched the tension in the air. Caleb approached the raucous group, his jaw set, every muscle in his body taut with resolve. Caleb Hawthorne, Jake's voice carried over the din, dripping with derision. You've gone too far this time. You know that. You think you can just take that boy in without consequences. Caleb took a breath, steadying his nerves as he faced the burly man. He's just a child, Jake. He needs help, not hostility. Jake's laughter echoed like thunder, a sound devoid of warmth. Help, you're risking your neck for some savage. He leaned forward in his saddle, eyes narrowing. What do you think the town will say when they find out? Maybe they'll see him for what he is, a child. Lost and alone, Caleb shot back, refusing to back down. Or maybe they'll finally learn that kindness doesn't have a color. The other riders shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, the tension palpable. Caleb could sense their hesitation, the flicker of doubt in their eyes, as they weighed the implications of Jake's hostility against Caleb's stubbornness. Kindness, Jake scoffed, his expression darkening. You think saving that boy will make them love you? You'll only invite their wrath. I'd rather face their wrath than turn my back on someone who needs me, Caleb replied, his voice unwavering. I won't abandon him. For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick and heavy as the oppressive heat. The riders shifted in their saddles, the wind carrying with it the scent of the dry earth and the unmistakable tension of an impending storm. Let's show him what happens when you defy the town, Jake finally sneered, his eyes glinting with malice. The other men shifted, their loyalty to Jake stronger than the flickering doubts that had briefly surfaced. Caleb felt a ripple of panic, but he stood his ground, heart racing as he prepared for the confrontation. You're wrong, Jake. This isn't just about me or the town. It's about doing what's right. With a snarl, Jake motioned to his men. Then let's see just how far your courage goes. The riders surged forward, a wave of hostility crashing against Caleb's resolve. He braced himself, every instinct screaming to protect Alec, to shield the innocent child from the storm that was about to break. But at that moment, a small voice echoed from behind Caleb, cutting through the rising tension. Please, don't hurt him. Ali stepped out from the shadows of the doorway, his small frame trembling yet defiant. I didn't do anything wrong. Caleb's heart leaped into his throat. Ali, no, he shouted, reaching out, but it was too late. The boy had already stepped into the fray, his innocence shining like a beacon amidst the gathering storm. Jake's laughter rang out, cruel and mocking, as he regarded the child. Look at this little whelp. You really think you're worth anything? Huh, just one more savage in the dirt. Caleb moved to shield Ali, a surge of protectiveness coursing through him. You leave him out of this, Jake. He's not part of your hatred. Ali's eyes darted between Caleb and the men before him, fear battling with a flicker of courage. I'm not a savage, he asserted, his voice trembling yet resolute. I'm Ali. I'm a person. The words hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope in a tapestry, woven with hostility and fear. Caleb felt the wind shift, a subtle change that hinted at the possibility of understanding. Maybe it's time you all remember what it means to be human, Caleb said, his voice steady, though the weight of the moment bore heavily upon him. We can choose compassion or cruelty. The choice is yours. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. The riders exchanged glances, uncertainty mingling with the hostility that had characterized their approach. Caleb could see the struggle within them, the flicker of empathy that dared to surface against the tide of their conditioning. But Jake, ever the instigator, spat on the ground, breaking the spell. Enough of this nonsense. We'll deal with you and that boy together. Caleb's heart sank, but he refused to let despair take root. You can't win against what's right, Jake. You may have numbers, but you don't have the truth. With a growl, Jake signaled his men forward. Then let's show him what happens when you stand alone. As the riders charged, Caleb stood firm, the weight of his choices bearing down upon him. He felt Ali's small hand grasp his own tightly, and for a moment, the warmth of that touch infused him with strength. Together, Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible above the chaos. No matter what happens, we stand together. The dust swirled around them, the sun casting a golden hue over the scene, illuminating the battle between fear and hope that raged within the hearts of those gathered. It was a moment suspended in time, where the future hung in the balance, tethered to the fragile thread of empathy that had begun to weave its way into the fabric of their lives. And as the storm approached, Caleb knew that whatever came next, he would fight not just for a living, but for the possibility of a world where kindness could flourish amidst the harshness of existence.